The agenda this week learned about heritage designations and explored Generation Z's approach to quiet quitting. The agenda's week in review begins considering whether humans are turning into plastic people.
Some of the science around microplastics is recent, but here's two things we know about microplastics, and both of them are disturbing. The first is that the chemicals in plastic, we know a lot about them. We know that they have, in many cases, a carcinogenic effect. We know that they have a hormonally disruptive effect. When they get in our bodies, they mimic estrogen. And so that there's been umpteen studies over decades on the negative biological effects of the chemicals in plastic. The second thing we know that Juliette just mentioned, going right back to the Industrial Revolution, we know that bad things happen when humans breathe in small particles. Lots of studies on women during the Industrial Revolution working in big factories, breathing in fibers in the garment industry. We know what happens when miners breathe in coal particles. We know what happens when miners breathe in asbestos particles.
No good comes from any of this.
Bad things happen in terms of the inflammatory effect. So as Phoebe just mentioned, we now know that these particles are in, likely, the lungs of everybody on Earth. It is, I think, inconceivable that turns out to be good news.
Phoebe, can I get you on that as well? Is it possible that while this stuff gets inside us, it may not do any long-lasting damage to us?
I agree with what Juliette said. It's still, I mean, we're both scientists. It's still kind of early on. So I can say that, as Rick is indicating, there are plastic places that I don't want a plastic particle to be. So what those plastic are doing there, in that what the cellular interactions are, if that's leading to some of the negative toxicological effects, it looks like it likely is from a variety of different ways, both, as Juliette was indicating, through some DNA changes that we're seeing, as Rick is indicating, through some endocrine disruption. I think those are all really good places to start, as well as both the lung inflammation and just overall system inflammation. We know that when particles are places that they shouldn't be, as Rick is indicating, that they're doing things we don't want them to do. And now the question is, what are plastics doing when they're there, and what are the different types of plastics doing? Are those different outcomes?
And let me do a follow-up with you, Phoebe. You studied microplastics in pregnant rats. What did you find?
We did. We studied something even smaller called nanoplastic that we haven't touched on yet during this conversation. And that's a plastic that's about 1,000 times smaller than a microplastic. So this is definitely something that we can't see. Unlike a microplastic, it's barely within the visible range. And what we found when we put these nano-sized plastics into our pregnant rat model, we not only were able to find them in the placenta of the rat mothers, but we were also able to find them in the fetal tissues after a single exposure, and that was into the mother's lungs, and that was 24 hours after exposure. We started to look for them in those fetal tissues, and we ended up finding these plastic particles in the rat brain, liver, heart, kidney, lung, places we definitely don't want them to be.
Can you make, Juliette, any conclusions about what this might mean for pregnant women?
Oh, I'm afraid it's very early days for that, and I certainly don't want to alarm pregnant women at this time. What we are doing in our lab, in our studies, is we're doing large-scale epidemiological studies in which we're recruiting pregnant women in order to get samples from their placenta at delivery, and we'll be able to follow up the health of their kids. And only when we do those kinds of long-term studies will we be able to really be able to say with more certainty that there is indeed a health risk. In the meantime, that of course doesn't mean you can't reduce your plastic exposure as much as possible. And what's really important in all of the projects I'm involved in is that we have government policymakers on board who are thinking about how can we assess the risk of these microplastics. There's such a really complex mixture of contaminants. It's not just one type of dust particle. It's a really complex group of contaminants of many different kinds of plastics, many different kinds of shapes and sizes and colors, full of different kinds of chemicals. So really complex when it comes to the policies we need to make there. But I also would like to say it's really important that we have in some of our research, some of the plastic manufacturers on board who are looking for ways to, produce better plastics, reduce the use of plastics, better understand how microplastics are formed from their products. And that's all really important work to think about solutions to this huge problem.
We certainly will come back to the issue of solutions and what we can do to change our behavior, change public policy. But before we get there, I want to talk to you, Rick, about the brain. Microplastics in the brain. What have you learned?
Well, I mean, Phoebe's actually done some of this groundbreaking research, and what she has found, and she should wade in here. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but as rat moms breathe in these particles, they then wind up in their fetuses, wind up in the brain compartment of those fetuses before the blood-brain barrier, in that critical moment of development that occurs in mammals, rats and people and others, where blood circulates in the body before that blood-brain barrier solidifies. And so these particles get locked into the brain.
Quiet firing is sort of when you, instead of actually firing somebody, loud firing, you actually give them fewer tasks, you give them less attention, you sort of quietly reduce their status or their significance in the workplace by giving them less, or treating them somewhat less included or involved. I think that's my sense of it, but again, it's sort of, the employer strikes back with, okay, you're gonna quiet quit, I'm gonna quiet fire. But I think the point about staff shortage is a good one, because when there isn't a surplus of workers, workers have more power. But as soon as there's a recession or something, I mean, I think that's when you're gonna see things swing back with employers having more power.
Rob, I want to come to you because we can laugh about quiet quitting, even just quiet firing, but in the end, I think when people get grouped into something like, oh, they're Gen Zers, they're going to quit, they're not as committed to their jobs, they don't value their jobs. If we hire them, we'll probably pay them less, or maybe not promote them because they'll just leave. In the end, does this affect the personal finances of those in Gen Z, Rob?
Well, I think quiet quitting, if it's a true thing, will affect them. I work on a podcast for the Globe Mail. It's called Stress Test. It's a personal finance podcast for Gen Z and millennials. And you know what our number one topic is? Housing. Our housing episodes are by far our most listened to episodes. And the reason is that, while I know a lot of Gen Zers and millennials don't think they will own a house, they badly want to. And if they want to, they're going to need to excel in the workforce. They're going to need to find a path where they have a rising income. And I think that, this idea of sort of pulling back from the workforce isn't conducive to that. But on the other hand, I'll say that it's actually a very good time for young people in the workforce today. There's a very tight job market. They have way more leverage than millennials did. Millennials, after the 2008-09 financial crisis, were boxed into contract jobs. They were like going back to school. There has never been more leverage. So I think if you were to find a job that you were engaged with as a young person, now is the time to go out there, ask for benefits, ask for a good salary, ask for a signing bonus. There are things on the table that have not been and will not be once that recession that everyone's talking about hits.
Natty, I saw you smiling.
No, I'm really liking what I'm hearing, but I'm also understanding this is like, I wanted to go back to the question of quiet quitting because it's not a new phenomena. It's actually like a very, very old tactic, and it's just been like reframed in new terms. And, to the question of who's making up these terms, I also want to know. But it like, if you think about what quiet quitting fundamentally is, it is like working down to the T of your employment contract in a way that is like lawful, right? Like you can't be fired for not doing that. And historically in more unionized settings, we just call that work to rule because you're working to the rules of your employment contract. And so you're performing like the actual functions that you're actually getting paid for. And so if the case is that, we can do just that, get the same amount of money, why does it make sense to go over and above and or beyond, right? And if we're able to actually, make sure that all of the terms in our employment contract are conducive to the wages that we're going to be getting and to the salary that we can be getting, then again, that gives us more power. So I really do see quiet quitting more so as like a form of protest that benefits, I guess, like every single member of Gen Z that's in working society. Because again, it really also identifies, okay, where are there gaps in a workplace where people need to be filling in those gaps, or where managers need to be filling in those gaps? And then how do we pay people to do that work again? And then like the people who are still there, Should they be getting paid more for the work that they're doing? Are they doing over like and above what they should be doing? And when they stop doing that, how is that impacting our organization? And okay, is this time to give them a promotion? So I like what I just heard. I don't like the new terms though.
Linda, Natty called quiet quitting a form of protest, and I think in previous generations, there were people who didn't do, maybe they were kind of like slackers, but I don't know if those generations would go on TikTok or Instagram and then declare it, right? Even if it is a form of protest, we would just maybe clock out earlier than we're supposed to, right? Not that I ever did that, I'm just saying people have, right? But Linda, do you think that quiet quitters might get quiet fired?
I absolutely do, and particularly if the economy goes down. I mean, some of this discussion is really interesting, but I don't know that it's economically feasible to do all the things that people would like to do and have this balance and decide when they're working and not working. I absolutely do think we should be looking at different kinds of work, remote work and gigs and contracts and everything else. But at the end of the day, people have to work a lot of hours to pay bills, particularly in the atmosphere we have right now. And it's the people who go above and beyond, not necessarily putting in a lot of hours, but certainly giving themselves to the job, being creative, trying to go a bit further, coming up with ideas, everyone else who are going to do better.
Heritage in general, in the broadest terms, is what we value from our past and what we want to preserve for our future generations. But in Ontario, when you hear the term heritage designation, that's specifically referring to the Ontario Heritage Act.
So it's a provincial law.
Mm-hmm. And so the intention of this is to identify, recognize, and protect sites that have cultural heritage value. So a site doesn't need to be a building, it often is, but it could also be a landscape or a district. And the way we determine if something qualifies for designation is there is criteria under the Act as well. Things like, does it have physical value? Does it have historical or associative value? Or does it have contextual value? It doesn't need to have all of those, but it needs to have some of those. And so this was enacted in 1975. Following a lot of heritage advocacy around concerns of our lost heritage sites. A notable one is Old City Hall in Toronto in the 60s, which was proposed for demolition, and of course is still with us today. So that's what it means when you hear heritage designation under the Act.
I would point out 1975 meant it was the Bill Davis government that put it in, and I only mention that because you're sitting in the Bill Davis studio right now.
Right.
He's also the godfather of TVO. Okay, in principle, Alex, a good thing that we have this act?
Absolutely it is.
Because?
Well, I mean, as Stephanie was saying, heritage is about preserving places that are important to us. And, in sort of plain language, it's either because the buildings are very good or very significant in an architectural sense, or because they have important social history attached to them. Or as in the case of the Old Toronto City Hall, both. And there was a moment prior to 1975 when we were tearing a lot of buildings down. In the United States and in Canada, these set of policies that are known as urban renewal involved remaking a lot of the city to remake it in a modern way, to eliminate neighborhoods that were seen as blighted, to create new infrastructure for cars, and in the process clear away a lot of buildings that were seen as not valuable. And we threw away a lot of important things in that period.
So we made some mistakes there.
We definitely did. I think the question now is whether the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction.
Okay, and your view is?
My view is that it has.
And that means what?
Well, heritage has expanded now in a way that the people who moved heritage forward in the 1960s and 70s would find very surprising. The number of listed and designated heritage buildings, even in the city of Toronto, was well into the thousands, which is far more than the original advocates of heritage preservation in that period would have expected. And on the one hand, heritage is expanding to take in more kinds of stories and more kinds of places, which is absolutely necessary. On the other hand, heritage is also becoming an obstacle to the growth of our cities, which is going to be a real problem for our housing, for the housing crisis and for the climate crisis as well.
Do you agree with that characterization, Stephanie?
I think it's a complicated situation.
That sounds like a no.
Of heritage. There's points that Alex is making that I do agree with, that we're certainly seeing instances of what we would call NIMBYism or not in my backyard attitudes that might use heritage in an attempt to block development. That exists, but I don't think that's reflective of the heritage profession, and I don't think it is the intention of heritage either.
Okay, can you just take us back? If let's say you represent a neighborhood organization or something, and you see an old building and you think it deserves to be protected, not demolished, et cetera. How do you get the thing designated as a heritage preservation site?
It's quite a complicated process. It's a very long process as well, and so I think when defining heritage, it's also helpful to note that a lot of buildings are heritage, but they're not heritage designated.
And that makes a difference.
Yes, designated means that there is protection under the Ontario Heritage Act.
And who does the designating?
It's a process of doing reports. The city staff will do reports into looking into, is there heritage value? How I said there's that criteria you have to go through.
But the city does it.
Municipalities will pass a bylaw to designate something.
And do you agree with him that I mean, Alex says there's thousands of places that are now receiving this designation that maybe not all deserve it. Do you agree with that?
I would say actually that I think there's a lot of buildings that are deserving of heritage designation that don't have designation yet, because it's such a long process to get that there's plenty of buildings that have heritage value that maybe haven't had time to go through this process yet, or because we have such a narrow definition of what counts as heritage. There's buildings that have a lot of cultural significance that are left out of this designation process, and a lot of diverse narratives that get excluded through the system.
That's just some of what we covered this week. You can find more, including the full conversations, on our website, TVO.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.